Hello, Classpad.net users. Today I'm going to work with a define functionality, and that means you have the capability to define functions, define lists, and use them throughout Classpad.net in different areas. So how does that work and what does that mean? So to get to the define functionality, you're going to go into Calculate. So let's pull up a Calculate sticky, and you'll notice I've got my soft keyboard that pops up, and right here you'll see the equal sign, but also the colon equal, and this is the define functionality I'm talking about. This allows you to tell the computer basically, or the software, to use a specific list value of lists or value of function throughout until you decide to change it. So for example, I could define a list. So let's define list A, and again, I can use anything. I could make my list multi-character, but if I use colon equals, and now let's just type in some random numbers here, and we'll just do 5. All this means is now whenever I use list A, whenever I use A, because I've defined A to be this list of 5 numbers, I'm going to always have those numbers being used. So if I do something like 2 times A, it's automatically going to multiply 2 by every value in that defined list. And if I want to then go into, say, statistics and say, hey, I might want to graph that list of values that I gave you before, all I have to do is type A into my label for my chart, and it pulls up that current list, the defined value. So that's nice. I can define functions. Let's define a function. So let's define f of x, and we're going to use, again, colon equals. So I could hit the soft keyboard. I've been typing it in. And let's make this be, I don't know, just do a quadratic here. So now I've defined that function, right? So that function f of x is now going to always be x squared minus 3x plus 2 whenever I decide to use it. So I could then say, okay, why don't you evaluate that function for -5? And so what the calculator is going to do now, or the computer, is going to plug -5 into x and give you a value for that function at 5. Sometimes students don't know what that means. You could use the multi-character capability, variable capabilities of Classpad. Instead of using a number, you could use a variable, and then and you'll notice that it's taking that cat variable and replacing x with cat. So now students can see what's actually happening here. And remember, I've defined a list up here, list A. So I could actually now, let's evaluate the function f of x for all the values in list A. So I am doing the defined values in the list A with the defined function. Watch what happens. I'm going to get a list back of those values on that function, right? And I could define several different things. So let's just make up another list. So again, colon equals, very important. And let's make this list also have 5 numbers in it. And now I could do the same thing. I could do, well, what's the value of the defined function f of x for all the numbers in my defined list of boy, except I do need to use letter. And again, I'll get the same thing. And now I could do what's a times boy, and I will get a list. So anything I define is going to continually be used and be able to be used throughout the whole page. I can use it in statistics, like we could now add our boy up here, and there's my list. I could even define, let's say we want to do the ratio of A to B, A to boy. So let's go down here and define it. And let's do ratio is A divided by boy, right? So I'm using 2 defined lists. Now watch what happens. It's now filled out in my statistics. So everything is talking to each other. Same thing here. If I pull up a graph, remember I have that function f of x defined. I can simply type in, okay, please graph that defined function that you have. And now I see that defined function here. And let's get another calculate sticky, and let's define a different function. So let's define g of x to be And again, we're going to do colon equals, let's do a linear function. And now I could do things like the composition of these functions. So I could do what is f of g of x. And it's going to basically take g of x and plug it into my defined function f of x up here, right? And now let's do the reverse of that. Let's do g of f of x. Same thing. And so you can see the differences right away, right there, and students can really explore what's happening. I could then go up and actually graph all of this as well, since it's all defined. So let's graph g of x so that we can see the difference. One's linear, one's quadratic. But now let's do the two different compositions. So y is equal to f of g of x was our first one, and then we did, oh, and let's change the color. Yellow is not a very nice color there. And let's do the opposite composition, y equals g of f of x. So now you can really do some explorations. I can plug in different values over here. So defining something is a really nice feature. You can define functions, you can define lists, and you can use them throughout. You can use them as in the graphs, you can use them in statistics, you can use them in calculations. So a really nice feature that is a great way to explore different things with students. So have fun exploring. Talk to you next time.